Okay, so I'm answering a question first from Fabian Pott. He was in our mastermind, and he posted a rather detailed question, and I answered it. But this one is common enough that I want to answer this part of it publicly on Hump Day Hangouts because, again, this comes up often, and I can understand where there may be some confusion here, and so I want to kind of clarify this for everybody. So from Fabian, he says, blog properties like Tumblr, Blogger, and WordPress, do they count as Tier 1 network? Or are Tumblr, WordPress, and Blogger already Tier 2 networks, which aren't counted for the rest of the properties? And so he's talking mainly about like a branded Tier 1 network, and he's trying to wrap his head around really the way that we stack networks if we're going to do that. So, you know, connecting multiple tiers. He says, I'm confused about this detail, and now I don't really understand which and when these properties are becoming Tier 2 or 1. Can you help me and give me some explanation why it's like this and why not so that I get it? All right, so this is an image, guys. I'm going to see if I can expand on it. All right, so this is an image just explaining a very simple graphic showing what the tiered network structure looks like, okay? So this would be, you know, Tier 1 here. And the way that this drawing shows here is that the Blogger, WordPress, and Tumblr are kind of like pushed out of the Tier 1 circle or ring, but they're actually part of Tier 1. The only reason why it was drawn like this was specifically so that I could show detail on the outer rings, if that makes sense. So the Blogger, Tumblr, and WordPress in a Tier 2 network are part of the Tier 1 ring, if that makes sense. Because again, just imagine, remember, and I've said this a bunch of times, but I understand how this can be confusing, guys. But you got to look at syndication networks each as an individual ring. That's it. That's all it is. Every single ring is an individual ring. When you start trying to visualize in your head, like the way that the networks all connect and these multi-tiered systems and stuff like that, it can get complex very, very quickly. It can get confusing as well. But when you break everything down to single individual syndication rings and then assemble them together, because that's all you're doing, it becomes a much easier process to understand and to comprehend, if that makes sense. So the point is here is this is one individual ring. The only thing that we're doing is we're taking the Blogger, Tumblr, and WordPress because they're the three blog properties that we consistently use for the networks. And then we're going to build another ring with those properties as the triggers, right? So it's going to be, each one's going to get its own ring. So Blogger will get a whole nother syndication network, which would be a second tier network, right? Typically, that's going to be a persona-based network. Or in some cases, it could possibly be like an author network for perhaps a multi-blog, or excuse me, a multi-author blog, for example, right? That that would make sense. But that's kind of more of an uncommon configuration. Whereas for our purposes, typically it's just going to be a persona-based blog network that is surrounded by or triggered by the blog property from the first tier network. Okay, does that make sense? So what happens is the blog RSS feed, the Blogger RSS feed in this case, is the trigger point for the second tier network IFTTT account. So the inside of this account, this network out here, which would have its own Blogger, its own WordPress, and its own Tumblr as well, right? So inside this account, when you go to set up the applets, or what formerly called recipes, you would choose RSS as the trigger. So if this, and then select RSS, then paste the RSS feed from the Blogger account from tier 1 into that field, and then that, and select, and then start going through the properties within the network that you're creating applets for. So Bitly, the Blogger account for that ring, WordPress, Tumblr, Digo, Delicious is apparently deprecated now, so that's not something that we can use anymore, but Buffer, all those other properties are going to be connected using Blogger as a trigger point. And then likewise for Tumblr and WordPress. So again, I can understand where that can be a little bit confusing, guys, because when you start to look at tiered structures, it's like, oh, where do I start and how does it all connect together? But if you remember that everything is, it's a linear process. It's a simple linear process in that IFTTT, it's logic, right? If this, then that. It's if this occurs, then that occurs. And you create the triggers and the actions. And again, it's only a step 1, step 2 type connection. There isn't a multi-step or threaded connection, if that makes sense. So everything is an individual ring, and it's only got a trigger point. And in the ring itself, or the syndication network itself, the whole thing is one action. It takes multiple applets for that to occur, but the one action is to just republish the trigger point content. That's it. So it becomes a much simpler concept when you break it down that way, if that makes sense. So anyways, hopefully that was helpful, Fabian. We also got another mastermind, like I said, webinar today for an hour following Hump Day Hangouts, and then I think our next mastermind webinar is next week. So we can go into more detail if needed. Let me know in the mastermind, by the way, or comment on this page and let me know if that was sufficient.